I like using the Joel Klatt show setup.
How we doing?
We're doing good.
What's up, Klatt? How are you, buddy?
By the way, I love that.
I'm fine. Now I got no mic. We're just using the laptop today.
You're good.
Sorry.
It's all good. We'll take you any way we can get you.
I have always loved that logo and that setup you've got there. Did the wife do that, or do you bring in Fox people to do that for you? How does that work?
Well, so I used to have, like, when we moved into this house, we just did the office how we wanted, and we had painted it very dark. And so then when I started doing the podcast last year, Fox kept being like, "It's too dark behind you." And I'm like, well, pound sand. So you want to come fix it. So then they said, like, okay, like, we'll come fix it. And then I was like, okay, great. My wife will design it. So that's it. And we still have to, like, we got to get some pictures over there and everything.
No,
but,
you can reverse the logo for Klatt and have the Joel to Talk show.
Talk. Yeah, to talk. I love that.
Talk, yes.
The Loge to Talk show.
It's backwards. What do you call those words that you can do frontwards and backwards?
Palindromes.
Yeah.
Hey, so Klatt, you did see a junk game, but this Michigan defense, I think Indiana got to the 10, but I don't think they ran a play inside of the 10. So I think now, am I correct, after 7 games, no opponent has run a play inside of Michigan's 10?
Wasn't one of the plays snapped at the 9?
I thought it was the 10, but
it might have been the 10. But yes, like, that was the first time that anyone had been down there. It was fascinating, and like, I don't expect everyone to be locked in on that game, surely. At one point, it's 7-0, and it's 154 total yards for Indiana, -8 for Michigan. And we're at like the 3-minute mark of the first quarter. And from that moment on, it was just like an onslaught. It was like Michigan, and for 2 straight weeks I've had this. I had Ohio State against Maryland previous, and then I had this one. Definition of sleepwalking. Just out there, and it's like they're dressed up for Halloween. And this is not a knock. This is just like the nature of how some of these games go. And then once they locked in, it kind of showed and proved, like, oh yeah. Don't worry about us. We're fine. Look at us. We're still Michigan. We can run it. And I think that the element of the team that I was most interested to see was just, it's not necessarily the explosiveness, but when they're taken outside of their blueprint, when they have to be outside of their blueprint, like, how does JJ McCarthy impact the game? I think for the most part, guys, like, he's a pretty dynamic guy that doesn't need to be dynamic all the time. So we don't talk about him a lot in the narrative of great quarterbacks in college football, but he does a few things on the field, and I'm like, okay, that's really special. It just so happens that he only has to throw it 18 times a game. But on 6 or 7 of them, you're like, oh, wow. If he needed to do that a lot, he probably could. But not different from TCU, he was really great, other than a couple of interceptions, and then against Ohio State late, and even in the second quarter last year, he kind of took the team to a different level. So it was interesting to be around that team. That's a really good team, really, really good team.
Well, that's what
best that they've had since I've been covering them.
That's what I was going to ask you, Lance, and I don't disagree with him. Lance says often that he thinks they're the best team in the country, and I'll use a basketball reference here. I think Gonzaga, there's a part of their schedule every year where I don't think they're challenged. And then they get to the NCAA tournament, and then all of a sudden, now Michigan's got games coming up. Penn State and Ohio State will be for real. But you played the game. Is there something about it being almost too easy that when you get to the big game that you really haven't had a shakedown cruise yet? Can you walk me through the mentality of how that could hinder them in one of the big ones coming up?
Yep. Yeah, I think that it's a great question. So then you get into, is it like more of the philosophy or just the human nature of it? Let's put it this way. All of us, individually and then as a group, whatever group you're in or individually, we like to think we have standards, right? Standards of our own behavior, expectations of our own behavior, expectations of the way that we perform in our career, the way that our family, anything like that. If you're part of a sales team, you guys are a part of a show, there's unspoken and spoken expectations. Over time, the most urgent expectation required is what you will default to as an individual or a group. And if a team like Michigan allows the most urgency that they are required to be these lower level games, then they will dip and they will default to that. But if they can hold it internally, like Georgia and Alabama have done for a long time, Alabama certainly for 15 years, and Georgia now over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, those teams and coaches and cultures are so impressive because you can tell that the internal standard is always more urgent and more important than the external standard. And that's what has made them so great. So that's what Michigan is going to have to traverse down the stretch, is this constant, every single day, am I willing as an individual and as a team to hold myself to standards that nobody else is holding me to? The scoreboard's not holding me to it. Even in practice might be easy. But what am I doing to get better every single day? And this is where the depth of that team, I think, really pays off. Because let's face it, this is what has been so good for Georgia and Alabama over the course of the last few years. And like I said, a long time for Bama, is that the depth has made practice an all-out. I was about to say where I don't want to use that reference. Certainly now, it's an all-out effort in practice just to get on the field, and so the expectation and the standards is held there. Well, Michigan is deep like that this year, and this is one of the things that I think makes them so dangerous. This is one of the things that I would put in an argument, Lance, if you were to say like, hey, this is the best team in the country. Part of that is their depth and their ability. And this is the way that they said it to me this week. They said, our depth, yeah, we play a lot of guys on Saturday, but it's what that affords us, not later in the season during games, but what it affords us on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Their practices, they say, have been so much faster, so much more physical, and guys are able to really focus and hone in on the details and fundamentals of what they need to do to stay on the field, that they feel like it makes them a sharper team. So really long answer, because that was an excellent question. But I believe it has to do with internal standards and how urgently they're held versus what you're being held to on an external standpoint.
Well, you said you were at Ohio State last week, and I think the last 6 quarters of Ohio State football, they've played elite football. And I think Kyle McCord is getting more and more confident. I think they're in a great spot, too, because Penn State rolls in, and there are people for the first time saying Penn State is the better team. So there's a lot of people backing this Penn State. Travion Henderson can be a big difference maker. Is he going to play Saturday? Do you know?
I don't know yet. It's one of the things that I'm eager to track down today, tomorrow, as the week goes on. More importantly, I think is Emeka Egbuka, and how effective he's going to be able to be on the field. The two in tandem, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka, make them incredible. Now they also have Julian Fleming, and by the way, they've brought along this true freshman, highly recruited player, Carnell Tate, who is becoming. They all say so. Let me back up really quickly. I know you asked about Travion Henderson, but I just take tangents. When I go to Ohio State, every time I go, I'm so fascinated. This is going back years. I ask them who's the next one. You guys pointed to, you've seen the locker room, who's the next Marvin? Who's the next, all this stuff. The guys, and there's only a handful that they'll actually name. The guys that have been pointed out to me throughout the years as watch out for him are Chase Young, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., those 4. Okay. Pretty good players, right? Dynamic players. Now there's a 5th one, and it's Carnell Tate. So at some point, whether it's this year in a big game, he's going to make a big impact. Now, having said that, the injury situation with Ohio State is serious this week. They are not healthy. Penn State is healthy. They had a bye week, then faced UMass and basically played 2 quarters and then pulled their starters. So Penn State's going to be the much more healthy team in this game. Ohio State's going to have to deal with Emeka Egbuka. Is he going to be on the field? Travion Henderson. Not only Travion Henderson, but Mayan Williams didn't play. Depth in that running back room. Chip Trainum then got a concussion. They were down to their 4th running back, Dallin Hayden, who they were trying to push towards a redshirt as a good young player. Then they get I keep saying I wanted to say Denzel Ward, but it's not Denzel Ward. Oh gosh, their corner is. Anyways, they have a corner. His name's also the Denzel Ward is just always the barbecue line from Gus, and so I can never get that out of my head whenever I hear
Denzel Burke.
First name Burke. There you go. Thank you very much. He got banged up last week. He's their best corner, so they need to get healthy. But to your point, you're 100% accurate. Their last 6 quarters have been their best of the season, outside of maybe the fourth quarter, last few quarters of the Notre Dame game. And I would just say this. I do believe that this team plays better when they're being doubted. We've seen that in playoff situations. No one gave them much of a chance against Georgia after losing to Michigan. They played excellent. And there's something about the way Ryan game plans and then attacks as a dog versus a favorite that makes them more dangerous. They're going to be at home. And the big equalizer here is that there's 2 young quarterbacks, and one of them is going to play really well, and the other one probably is going to make a couple mistakes. And I think that's where the game will be won or lost. Last thing that I'll say, and we saw a case study of this last week in the Washington-Oregon game. The coach and the offensive coordinator, more specifically, that puts his quarterback in the middle of the quarterback's strengths is going to win. Because and this is exactly what happened with Washington and Oregon. Think of just the last few minutes of that game. Washington leaned into what Michael Penix could do. Full field reads, pick a matchup, throw with leverage, be a great passer of the football. And then in the most crucial moments for Oregon, 4th and goal before halftime, 4th down at the end of the game, they took a quarterback that had started 53 games in his career, and they took 3/4 of the field away from him. He's a great decision maker. He's playing efficient football, and they sprinted out in both of those situations. It's one read and done. You got nothing after the one read. So you minimize the options for an experienced quarterback. I believe that was a mistake for Oregon. So when you point that forward, any big game down the course of the season, down the stretch of the season, watch it through those lenses. What's the play caller doing to put his quarterback in a best position to succeed based on what the strengths of that player is?
Joel Klatt of Fox, big noon kickoff, Ohio State and Penn State this weekend from the Horseshoe. 11 o'clock Central on Fox. He joins us each week courtesy of MyBookie.ag. Still doing that 110% sign-on bonus. You sign on, make a deposit. They give you a 110% bonus, MyBookie.ag. That is when you use code NEXTROUND at MyBookie.ag. You did not like the play call. Did you like the decisions by Dan Lanning? It felt like the one he made right at the end of the half almost handcuffed him to keep going for it later on.
So I think both of those were very different situations. And what I dislike about the overall mentality of that we're always going to be aggressive is that every situation is wildly different. And the risk reward profile is wildly different. I very much disagree with going for the 4th down before the half. I don't mind the one at the end of the game. Again, that decision and then the execution and the play call are separate things, and so I think a lot of times what we do is we see a failed 4th down and then we immediately revert back to the decision. And sure, I understand that, but to me, the play call of the last 4th down was the worst part of the entire process. So let me break this down really quick. If you're going to go for a 4th and goal, part of the risk reward profile of a 4th and goal opportunity is that if you fail, you're still setting yourself up for an advantage in subsequent series because of field position. This is one of the inherent advantages of going forward on 4th and goal. Now, they didn't have that advantage. They weren't going to potentially get a series after that because the situation of the game was halftime. They're under 10 seconds. So all the benefits of potentially failing are out the window, which means it's much more about just 3 points or potentially 7. And I think you take the 3 points there. As it is, if you fail, you're going to give them a lot of energy going into the half. You would have had the ball coming out of the second half with a much bigger belief in yourself. So that halftime at Oregon is going to be very down, trying to pump yourself up. Washington's halftime is going to be very up. There is momentum. It's a human instinct, right? And so then Washington comes out. They've got all that energy, and they force a 3 and out from Oregon. So they're on what could be a 10-point swing in the game in terms of a good series on the front end of that second half, and the 3 points turns into no points. Okay, so that's that one. I don't like that decision. At the end of the game, I don't mind it as much. And the reason is because if you ask Dan Lanning before the game, hey, Dan, you're going to have a fourth down. I shouldn't say that because he would just say yes before you even set up the situation. But
I'm going for it. I'm going for it. Yes.
Yeah, of course. You're going to have one snap for the game. Would you take it? He would say absolutely. Absolutely. And that's that situation. You can end the game. And so I don't mind that decision. I minded the play call, rolling left, cutting off 3/4 of the field. I really despise the play call. It's not the strengths of what the quarterback Bo Nix can do. Plus, everyone's saying like, well, their defense played so well in the second half. You can't just assume Penix was going to go down the field. On the contrary, that's what he had just done in the previous series. 13 plays all the way down. Now they stopped him at the 1. There was that, remember, like the fumble, and then they reviewed it. They stopped him at the 1, so good on them. But if you're Dan Lanning, I'm sure he felt a little bit like what Pete Carroll felt like in 2005 on 4th down when Vince Young's on the other side of the field. It's like, I would much rather try to end this game right now with my guys rather than go out there and give him 10 snaps with 2 minutes to go. So I don't mind that decision. But again, and then by the way, when you get into like play calling, quarterback strengths, think about this. Ryan Grubb has been with Kalen DeBoer. Ryan Grubb's their offensive coordinator. He's been with Kalen DeBoer all the way back to Sioux Falls. He was like a strength intern at Sioux Falls. So these guys know each other. They're at Fresno State. They know each other. Communication, their philosophy in big moments is basically enmeshed in the culture of the coaching staff. Will Stein's in his first year as coordinator for Oregon. Comes up from UTSA. And even if you have some history as a friend, like they're not enmeshed in the philosophy. Maybe they haven't talked about, listen, we're going to go for it on 4th down. And then Will's like, all right, what do I like as 4th down calls? Maybe they haven't had a chance to sit there and really talk about the philosophy of what's Bo great at, and let's put him in the situation to succeed in those moments. Because those sprint outs on 4th down, I got to be honest, like there's few times during game when I want to throw something. That's one of them. Do not take an experienced quarterback and cut off 3/4 of the field.
As you do your prep for this week's game, sneaky pipeline for James Franklin. 4 state of Alabama players in Keaton Ellis, who has played high school football here locally as well before he transferred out. So sneaky pipeline into SEC country for James Franklin from his days in Nashville.
You know what's so fascinating, you guys, and maybe you don't care, I don't know, maybe this is interesting to you or not. The Big Ten East tiebreakers are hilarious when you actually go through it and you look at if there were to be a scenario where all 3 of these teams, Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, wind up 11-1. And they're, it's the 2008 Big 12, remember, with Texas Tech and Oklahoma and Texas. You get down to like the 6th tiebreaker, which is the winning percentage of the crossover opponents in the league schedule. And you start getting down to like Northwestern beat, I think it was Indiana earlier in the year. And Northwestern, I believe, is a crossover opponent for Penn State. And so right now, like that game, if they're all tied, would put Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. It's wild. Just something that I'm tracking as a total nerd.
All right, you will see Klatt. Ohio State, Penn State, big noon kickoff. Biggest game of the weekend on Fox, 11 a.m. Enjoy it, Klatt. Should be a fun one.
Thanks, guys.
All right, buddy, we'll see you.
Good to speak with you. You guys have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Klatt with us on
man.
the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. He's presented each week by MyBookie.ag, code next round. When you sign on to MyBookie.ag, get that sign-on bonus of 110%. You make a deposit, they give you a 110% bonus. That is free money. You can play right away, win with it once. It is yours forever. MyBookie.ag, code next round. That is MyBookie.ag, code next round.